I'm going over solutions to every algebra question on the SAT. This is part 9 about linear functions, specifically going over every hard problem on the SAT online question bank. For each question on this video, the question will be 3 out of 3, which is hard difficulty. All of them are under the domain algebra and the skill linear functions. Every question has a unique question ID, and if you look in the video description, you'll be able to find every question ID along with a timestamp of the exact minute and second where I go over that problem. And you'll be able to see a short description of the topic that's covered in that question. A window repair specialist charges $220 for the first 2 hours of repairs, plus an hourly fee for each additional hour. The $220 is kind of like the y-intercept here, except note that includes the first 2 hours. So if you were talking about the number of hours after 2 hours, then $220 would be your y-intercept. But since you are technically not getting charged for those 2 hours, it's like you can subtract the 2 hours cost from that $220. So what I mean is normally you would write it as y equals mx plus b, where b is your initial charge, m is the hourly rate, and then x is the number of hours, because hourly rate times the number of hours is like the total hourly cost plus that initial fee. But in this case, we're going to multiply the hourly rate by x minus 2. Because you're not being charged this m rate for the first 2 hours. It's only for those hours after the first 2. So we can write it like this, where f of x is equal to m times the quantity x minus 2 plus 220, m being the slope, right, the hourly charge. So they say the total cost for 5 hours of repair is $400. So when x is 5, f of x, like the output, would be 400. You can use that to solve for what the m value is. Which function f gives the total cost in dollars for x hours of repair where x is greater than or equal to 2. So they're making sure that this x minus 2 is not less than 0. You can't have negative hours of work, basically. So the function only will work for the ones that are over 2 hours. What we can do, again, like I said, plug in 400 for f of x, and then is equal to m times the quantity x minus 2, where x is 5, will be 5 minus 2 plus 220. That gives us that 400 equals 3m plus 220. And now to solve for m, you just subtract 220 from both sides. That gives us that 3m is equal to 180. And then we want just 1m, so we'll divide both sides by 3. Gives us that m is equal to 60. All right, so his hourly rate is $60 for all of the hours of work after the first 2 hours. So that means that we could write it as f of x equals 60 times x minus 2, the quantity x minus 2, plus that 220 for the first 2 hours. Now, if we look at the options, they don't actually give us any options that have parentheses. So we're going to have to use the distributive property here. And we'll do 60 times x, and 60 times negative 2 gives us 60x minus 120, and then we still have that plus 220 at the end. And we can combine our like terms, the negative 120 and the plus 220. That gives us that 60x plus 100 is equal to f of x. So this is what we want, and if we look in the options, that is option A. So they did try to trick you here where they have 220 as just the y-intercept. Do make sure that you are accounting for that first 2 hours where you have to subtract what would have been the $120 you'd make for making $60 an hour for those 2 hours from the 220 so that you're not double counting it. And these ones, they just have the wrong slope. So we know it's not C and D, it's not B. An economist modeled the demand Q for a certain product as a linear function of the selling price P. The demand was 20,000 units when the selling price was 40 per unit, and the demand was 15,000 units when the selling price was $60 per unit. Based on this model, what is the demand in units when the selling price is $5 per unit? All right, so they give us when the selling price is 40, the demand, or they did the demand as Q. This is like an economics problem. The demand would be 20,000. When the price was 60, the demand goes down to 15,000. That makes sense. If it's more expensive, fewer people would want to buy it. And now we're trying to figure out 55. Now, just right off the bat, we know it's got to be between 15,000 and 20,000. All of the options are. So that doesn't necessarily help us. It should be, since it's a linear relationship, it should be closer to the 15,000 than to the 20,000. So we can eliminate the D because that's in the middle of those two. The middle of them would be 50. But if we want to find this exactly, we can figure out what the slope is. You could say our change in Q divided by our change in P, so change in quantity demanded divided by the change in price would be, let's see, when the quantity goes down by 5,000, it's negative 5,000 for the demand, when the price goes up by 20. So we can write that as negative 5,000 divided by 20. You can simplify that take a 10 out of both of them, so it's 500 over 2, which is equal to negative 250. It was negative 500 over 2. So that's your slope, right, in terms of change in demand divided by change in price. If we write out an equation, we can say the quantity demanded is equal to negative 250 times the price plus some y-intercept, which we don't know. That would just be essentially, if it was free, if the price was 0, how much demand would there be? Assume that means infinite. It's like, oh, if it's free, then you get infinite of them. But, there's going to be some people who wouldn't want it anyway. And also, it's kind of a theoretical thing. Like usually a line would not actually be able to be extrapolated that far. But we can figure it out from these points. So let's use when P is 40,000, Q is 20,000. So we could say negative 250 times 40 plus B is equal to 20,000. And now negative 250 times 4, well, 250 times 4 would be 1,000. So times 40 would be 10,000. So we'd get negative 10,000 plus B is equal to 20,000. And then to get B alone, we just add 10,000 to both sides. And that gives us that B is equal to 30,000. So the y-intercept is 30,000. Theoretically, that would mean if the price was 0, if they're given away for free, 30,000 people would want it. That'd be the quantity of the demand. Now we can write our equation, put this B value in right here. We get that the equation is Q is equal to negative 250 times P plus 30,000. So 30,000 is like your y-intercept. That's the initial demand. Then for each dollar that the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down by 250. With that in mind, you could just work backwards or forwards from one of these values, but I'm just going to plug in 55 for P. So 250 times 55 plus 30,000, and then we're just calculating what would be the Q value there. I'm just going to use my calculator here. We've got 250 times 55 is 13,750. So we have negative 13,750 plus 30,000, which is essentially just 30,000 minus 13,750. And that gives us that the quantity demanded is equal to 16,250. And again, that makes sense. It's closer to 15,000 than it is to 20,000, which is what we would want. If it's 55, it's closer to 60 than it is to 40, and it's a linear relationship. The cost of renting a backhoe for up to 10 days is $270 for the first day and $135 for each additional day. Which of the following equations gives the cost y in dollars of renting the backhoe for x days, where x is a positive integer and x is less than or equal to 10? Well, the less than or equal to 10 is just because it says for up to 10 days. So like this wouldn't work for more than that. You have a different pricing rate for an 11th day or something. But we know that it's $270 for the first day and then $135 for each additional day. So you do 135 times x, except you don't do 135 for the first day. So we're actually going to do times x minus 1 because the first day is covered by this 270. So 135 times the quantity x minus 1, which is basically the total number of days excluding the first day. So if you did 3 days, then x minus 1 would be 2. Because it's the first day plus another 2 days. If you did 9 days, then 9 minus 1 will give 8. It's 8 days and the first day. That's 9 days. Right, so this is the cost, and we'd say that's equal to y, the cost in dollars. They don't have any of these with parentheses, so we just have to use the distributive property, distribute this 135 to the x and to the negative 1, which gives us 135x minus 135 plus 270. And then combine our like terms, the 135 and the 270. Just think of that as 270 minus 135, which gives us 135x plus 135 is equal to y. So that would be D. And that just happens to be the same as the slope there, basically because essentially the first day you're paying double, right? You're paying the 135, what would be the daily cost, plus another 135 that gives you up to the 270 just for that first day fee. So the adding 135 accounts for the fact that the first day you're basically paying double. Right, that's how you do that one. F of x equals 9/5 times the quantity x minus 273.15 plus 32. So this looks like it's something about converting temperatures. What would it be? From Kelvin into Fahrenheit, I believe, but we'll see. The function f gives the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit that corresponds to a temperature in x kelvins, right? Because 273.15 Kelvin is equal to 0 degrees Celsius. And if you have the temperature in Celsius, you multiply it by 9/5 and add 32. That's how I knew what they were doing there. But you don't need to know that to do the SAT though. They give you this formula. You just have to be able to read here. And it says, if a temperature increased by 9.10 kelvins, by how much did the temperature increase in degrees Fahrenheit? So here's where this minus 273.15 doesn't actually matter. Because if you increase the x, either way, you're subtracting 273.15, whether this x was 0 or whether this x, I mean, it wouldn't be 0 kelvins. You're not probably doing something with absolute 0. But whether this was 300 or whether it was 400, you're subtracting the same thing from it. And either way, this getting multiplied by 9/5 the same. So the only thing that changes is when you multiply whatever the new x is by 9/5, then that change in x is multiplied by 9/5. So if it goes up by 9.10 kelvins, and this is 9/5 is your slope, which is basically change in output, so change in Fahrenheit divided by change in Kelvin. We want to find the change in Fahrenheit. Then we just multiply 9/5 times 9.1, which is basically 1.8 times 9.1. But 9 divided by 5 times 9.1 gives us 16.38. 16.38. If you want to test that, just try it with 300, like plug in 300 into this equation. So 300 minus 273.15 times 9/5 plus 32. Right, the plus 32, you just add anything to 32, it's going to be 32 bigger. Like it's not scaled up because of the temperature change here. So you could try that and then try 309.1 minus 273.15. Right, you could do any numbers. You don't have to do 300 and 309.1, but just whatever this number is, add 9.1 to it. And when you do this, you'll find that it is 16.38 higher. Right, so that's how you could check that one. Just to walk through it really quick, 300 minus 273.15 gives you 26.85. If you multiply that by 9 and divide it by 5, and then add 32, this would give you 80.33. And now if what I said is true, then it should be 16.38 higher than that. So it should be about 96.7, something like that. And let's see, 309.1 minus 273.15 gives us 35.95. You multiply that by 9 and divide it by 5, and then add 32 to it. We get 96.71. Like I said, 96.7 something. That is 16.38 higher. So it's just a quick way to check it. Just choose a number. It doesn't say what the change is going from or to, because it will be the same no matter what you're adding that 9.1 to. Okay, we've got a graph here. The graph of the linear function y equals f of x plus 19 is shown. If c and d are positive constants, which equation could define f? Basically, we took f of x. So f of x is some linear function, and we shifted it up by 19. So this is the shifted up one that they have here. The real one would be 19 less than that. So this is at 3, and then you'd go basically down here. It would be, the y-intercept would be negative 16. So this would be 0, comma, negative 16. And the slope should still be the same. Like they didn't dilate it or rotate it or anything like that. All they did was shift it down. It's just a translation. So the slope is still the same. And we can see the slope is negative. It's a negative number that is, like it's pretty steep. So it's less than negative 1. It's a greater absolute value than 1. And again, we know our y-intercept is negative 16. It's 19 less than this one, so 19 less than 3. All right, so I'm just going to erase that so we can see the options a little better. But it says c and d are positive integers, or positive constants. They aren't necessarily integers, but our y-intercept is, what's the d, I guess? And d, as we said, has to be negative 16. So we have to choose one that has negative in front of the d. If d is positive, then you have to multiply that positive by a negative to get negative 16. So we know it's not d because that is a positive d. And we know it's not b because that is a positive d. Now between these two, our slope, again, is the same as this line. So the slope is negative, and it's pretty steep negative. That doesn't really matter, but this one has a positive slope because we said c is a positive number. So if you're multiplying the x by a positive number, that's a positive slope. And it's in slope-intercept form. It would have to be a, negative d minus cx. And we could even find what that slope is. See, we're going down 4 over 1. So the actual function is f of x equals negative 4x minus 16, or the way they wrote it is negative 16 minus 4x. And if these two numbers have to be positive, then they have to have a negative sign in front of them. So that's why it would be a. For the linear function f, the table shows 3 values of x and their corresponding values of f of x. So it shows basically the inputs and then the outputs. If h of x equals f of x minus 13, so you just subtract 13 from your output, and that would be h of x, which equation defines h? So if we want to just fill in this table with h of x, you just subtract 13 from each of these. 0 minus 13, negative 13. 1 minus 13 would be negative 12, and 2 minus 13 would be negative 11. All right, so that's, for these same points, that would be the h of x values. And, I mean, you can see the slope is still the same. If you shift it downward, it doesn't change the slope. For this one, we have to find the slope. It's going from 0 to 1, that's your change in x, or that would be your change in f of x, or your change in outputs. I'll just write that as change in y, because usually graph y equals f of x. Right, so change in y, it's going up by 1, and our change in x is a little bit more annoying. It's going from -4 to -19 fifths. Well, if we put that in fifths, this would be -20 fifths, right? 20 divided by 5 is 4. So it went up by 1/5. It's getting less negative. So it goes up by 1/5. So it's a positive slope, which all of these are positive options. 1 divided by 1/5, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So it's the same as multiplying by 5 over 1. So our slope will be 5. And actually all of the options have a slope of 5. We didn't really need to do that there. But our slope is still 5. And now we just need to figure out what the y-intercept is. Well, the y-intercept is when x is equal to 0. So what we could do is write out our equation. We'd say y equals, our slope is 5, so 5x plus the y-intercept, which is what we're solving for. And now just choose a point. And we can choose any of these points. I'm going to do the -4. I'll erase that -20 fifths. So -4 as our input. And for h of x, which is the one we're trying to solve for, to find h, that would be -13, right? That's 13 less than 0, which was the output for f. When x is -4, so 5 times -4 plus b, our output would be -13. And now 5 times -4 is -20. -20 plus b equals -13. You could think, what do you have to add to -20 to get -13? That would be 7. Or you could just add 20 to both sides to get the b alone. And we get that b is equal to 7. So our y-intercept is 7. We would write the equation as, what is it, h of x? h of x is equal to 5x plus our y-intercept 7. And that is option B. If you want to check it, just plug in these inputs and see if you get the outputs that I wrote on that table. So plug in -4, plug in -19 fifths, -18 fifths, and you should get -13, -12, and -11 respectively. Make sure you do that, especially if you know you're going to have time left over. If you're rushing, maybe star it and then come back if you have time to check. The functions f and g are defined as f of x equals 1/4 x minus 9, and g of x equals 3/4 x plus 21. If the function h is defined as h of x equals f of x plus g of x, what is the x-coordinate of the x-intercept of the graph? So we're just finding the x-intercept of y equals h of x. H is the sum of those two. So if we write out h of x is equal to, f of x is 1/4 x minus 9, and then we're adding g of x, which is 3/4 x plus 21. Now I'm going to combine the like terms here. We have 1/4 x and 3/4 x, and then we have -9 and 21 are both constants. So it gives us that h of x is equal to 1/4 x and 3/4 x. That adds up to 4/4 x, so there's just 1 x. And -9 plus 21, that's 21 minus 9, which equals 12. So we get x plus 12 is h of x. So what is the x-coordinate of the x-intercept? The x-intercept is when y is equal to 0. So be careful. A lot of times they're asking for the y-intercept. That's what you're used to seeing in school. The x-intercept, again, would be where it crosses the x-axis, not the y-axis. So the output, the vertical distance, is 0. It's not up, it's not down from that axis. So we plug in 0 for h of x. 0 equals x plus 12. And then you figure out what value of x will give you that output of 0. And we could think, what plus 12 makes 0? X has to be -12. Or just subtract 12 from both sides, and x is equal to -12. Right, so that's your answer. If you want, you can plug it into this whole thing. So 1/4 times -12 gives you -3 minus 9 gives you f of x is -12. And then 3/4 times -12 would give you, let's see, that would be -3 times 3, which is -9, plus 21, which would be 12. So we get -12 plus +12, which would be 0. Right, so that's why that's an x-intercept. Right, so that's one way you could check it. This would be how you would do that one. According to data provided by the U.S. Department of Energy, the average price per gallon of regular gasoline in the United States from September 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2014 is modeled by the function f, defined below, where f of x is the average price per gallon x months after September 1st. So f of x equals 2.74 minus 0.19 times the quantity x minus 3. So that means essentially at the end of 3, what was it, months? At the end of 3 months, the price should be 2.74. It's 3 minus 3 is 0. That would get rid of this part. And then each month after that, it goes down by $0.19, I think. Average price per gallon. The price per gallon goes down that much. The constant 2.74 in this function estimates which of the following. So again, it's not the initial price. 2.74 would only be the actual f of x, the output value, when this part is 0, which is when x is 3. So September, October, November, December. That would be December 1st. So 2.74 is essentially the price on December 1st. The average monthly decrease, no, the decrease is negative, or is 0.19. It's going down by 0.19. That's why it's negative there. And I'll just write what that should be. The difference in the average price per gallon from September 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2014. No, not necessarily. We know that this is the price in December is 2.74, but the price in September was not 0. So actually not necessarily, definitely not. Right, the price would be when you plug in 0 here, you get -3 times -0.19. So it's ended up going to be bigger than that. So it's definitely not that. The average price per gallon on September 1st, no. That would be when X is 0, you would not get 2.74 as your output. But the average price per gallon on December 1st, yes, because that would mean it's 3 months after. So X equals 3. You plug a 3 in there, you get 3 minus 3 is 0. It negates this part, and you're just left with the 2.74. So D is the average price per gallon on December 1st. Now just be careful when any of these ones where you have, instead of something times X, right, it's not in actual slope-intercept form because you have this parentheses X minus 3, then the y-intercept does not actually represent the initial amount in that case. It would be the amount when this thing is equal to 0, when the thing in parentheses X minus 3. 1 gallon of stain will cover 170 square feet of a surface. A yard has a total fence area of W square feet. Which equation represents the total amount of stain, S, in gallons needed to stain the fence in this yard twice? Oh, okay, so twice. That's an annoying thing because I feel like someone could easily miss that, the twice part. But anyway, we know that it takes 1 gallon to do 170 square feet. And we don't know what W is. But if you divide W by 170, it would give you the number of gallons you need. Because think about if W is equal to double 170, so say it's 340, you'd need twice as much paint as you need for 170 to do twice as much area. So if it was half as much, right, so if this was 85 over 170 is 1/2, so you would only need 1/2 of a gallon. So that makes sense. But you can't just write S equals W over 170 because remember that you have to do it twice. So technically, if you're doing it twice, then even if it can cover 170 square feet, you can only do half as much as that. Essentially, if you want to figure out how many gallons you need double W over 170, because W over 170 is the amount that you would need to do 1 coat for an area of W square feet. But if you multiply that by 2, then that's saying that you would need 2 gallons to do that. Right? So if your area was 170, 170 divided by 170 is 1. So it'd say, okay, you only need 1 gallon to do 170 square feet, but you have to do it twice over. So double that 1, you get 2. Right, so they should have something that's like this, 2W over 170. If we simplify that, it would be W over 85, because that's half of 170. You can write 2W over 170, divide the top and the bottom by 2, and you get W over 85. Right, so that's equal to S, that'd be D. Right, so this one was kind of mean, because they're doing this twice. I could definitely see someone missing that twice thing, but you have to make sure that you understand that it's going to be either A or D, and then remember that you are doubling the top, which actually halves the denominator. Like which of these would tell you that you need more stain by a factor of 2? That would be this one. Okay. For the linear function f, the table shows 3 values of x and their corresponding values of f of x. Think of x as the input, f of x is your output. Function f is defined by f of x equals ax plus b. This is slope-intercept form there, where a and b are constants. What is the value of a minus b? So we just have to figure out what the slope is and what the y-intercept is, and then you subtract the y-intercept from the slope. We'll figure out the slope is going to be change in y divided by change in x. Now they didn't give it as y, but just treat the f of x, that's the output, as your change in y. See that the y is going up by 64. It goes from negative 64 to 0, and then from 0 to 64. And in both of those intervals, the x is going up by 1. So plus 1, plus 1. So you can write the change in y divided by change in x, also called the slope, is equal to 64 over 1, which is just 64. Slope is 64, that's our a value. So f of x equals 64x plus, and then we have to figure out what y-intercept value is the b. So let's say a equals 64. Now to find the b value, what we can do is plug in one of these points. Now you can use any of these points. I'm going to use the 1 and the negative 64. So plug in when x is 1, then you'd get f of 1 equals 64 times 1 plus b, and that will be equal to negative 64. So we get negative 64 equals 64 plus b, and then if you want to get b alone, you would subtract 64 from both sides, and we get 64 minus 64, which is negative 128. So b equals negative 128. If you wrote out the entire function, it would be f of x equals 64x plus negative 128, so minus 128. Now, they said we want to find A minus B. So we have 64 minus, B is negative 128 because it's adding B. So you have to add a negative to that. It'd be minus negative 128. If you subtract a negative, then that's the same as adding that number as a positive, right? It's like negative times negative makes positive. So this will be 64 plus 128, which would give us 192. So 192D is your answer. Oil and gas production in a certain area dropped from 4 million barrels in 2000. So in 2000, you had 4 million barrels to 1.9 million barrels in 2013. So in 2013, it was 1.9 million. Assuming that the oil and gas production decreased at a constant rate, so it's a linear function, which of the following linear functions, f, best models the production in millions of barrels t years after 2000? So you can basically treat 2000 as year 0, this is t0, and then this would be year 13. And then our output, what are they saying, is f of t. Right, so you have f of t over here, and then you have t over here. Now we want to figure out, well, they gave us the y-intercept because they gave us when t is 0, you have 4 million. So we're going to be adding 4 to the end of it. F of t is equal to our slope times x plus that 4. And we just have to figure out what the slope is. And already all of these options have plus 4 at the end, so that y-intercept doesn't really help us yet, but it will help us to know what the slope is. So looking at, we know that the oil and gas production is going down, so the slope should be negative. So we can immediately eliminate A and B because those must have positive slopes. Just always think about it logically, how can you narrow it down? If you were rushing, then you went from a 1 in 4 chance to a 50-50 chance, right, like that. But what we can do is figure out our change in, I'll write change in f of t, which is change in output, over change in t. You could also think of that as change in y over change in x, but leave it as this because they gave it to us in t's and f of t's. And let's see, it went from 4 million down to 1.9 million for the change in f of t, which would be going down by 2.1 million. So it says in million, so I'll just leave it as minus 2.1. And then for a change in x, I'll change this color. So change in t, change in the inputs went from 0 to 13. So 13 years passed when that dropped down by 2.1. So that would be plus 13. So it goes down 2.1 when it moves to the right 13 if you're graphing this on a set of coordinate axes. None of these is exactly negative 2.1 over 13 because they didn't want to have a decimal in the numerator, but you can just multiply the top and bottom by 10. So you get negative 21 over 13 times 10 is 130. So that would be your slope, negative 21 over 130. And then we just plug that into our equation here. We get f of t equals negative 21 over 130 times x plus 4. And that is equivalent to option C. Right, so option C is our answer. That is the right slope, and it's a negative slope because it's going down. Right, make sure you're not rushing on that. 1 gallon of paint will cover 220 square feet of a surface. A room has a total wall area of W square feet. So this is very similar to the stain one we had earlier. It says, which equation represents the total amount of paint, P, in gallons needed to paint the walls of the room twice? They also did the twice thing. So be very warned when you're taking the SAT, if the question, especially, I don't know if they list the difficulty, I don't think they would, but say you got into the second section, you know you're going to get hard questions if you did really well in your first section, and you get something like this. Like, all right, well, this is, it's maybe a little bit hard to keep track of the variables and which thing are you dividing by which thing, so that would make sense that it's a little bit hard, but at the same time, they need to have some other trick in sometimes. So this is your trick. You have to do it twice over. So however much paint you think you need, double that much paint. We go paint is equal to, it's 220 square feet for 1 gallon. And we have W square feet. We want to find out how many gallons that would be. What you do is divide the number of square feet, W, by 220. Because that means if you have double 220 of 440, then that will tell you you need 2 gallons to do that many square feet. If you have half as many, so 110, that would be 110 over 220, it would tell you you only need half a gallon, which is accurate. But if you remember that you're doing it twice, then however much paint you think you need to double that amount of paint. So we're going to multiply this by 2. And when you multiply that by 2, you could write it as 2W over 220, but you can simplify this. They both have a 2 in the numerator and the denominator as a factor. So divide the top by 2 and the bottom by 2. It gives you that W over 110 is equal to the amount of paint you need. And that would be option A. Again, B and D kind of have it backwards. They're having them multiply it. You're not multiplying the amount of paint you need. C, they forgot. C is trying to catch the people who didn't get you're doing it twice. You're doing each wall 2 times. And again, just if you're comparing which of these answers would be right, this one is twice as big as this one. Even though the number in the denominator is half the one from here, but if you divide by a smaller number, then the end result would be bigger. F of x equals 9/5 times the quantity x minus 273.15 plus 32. So it's another one where they're giving us a temperature in Kelvin, and then you're converting it into Fahrenheit. So the function f gives the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit that corresponds to a temperature of x kelvins. If a temperature increased by 2.10 kelvins, by how much did the temperature increase in degrees Fahrenheit? Essentially, if you distribute this 9/5 to the x and to the minus 273.15, you're still getting 9/5 times negative 273.15 no matter what x is. And you're still adding 32, again, no matter what x is. So the only thing that's affected by the x would be that 9/5 times x term, which will show up in the f of x. So if x goes up by 2.10, then you multiply that increase by 2.10, right? You could write it as like x plus 2.10, and you still have 9/5 x, like you did originally, but you're getting bigger by a factor of 9/5 time, or not by a factor, you're getting bigger by an amount, right? It's going up a fixed amount of 9/5 times 2.10. And then again, you still have this minus 9/5 times 273.15, and this plus 32. Right, so this part is present in all of these. Shrink that down like that, whatever. Okay, so the only thing that changed, we have this, we have this, we have this. At the beginning, we still have this, we still have this, we still have this. The only thing that changed was this. We added 9/5 times 2.10. And then you could write that as 1.8. That is a decimal. But 9/5 times 2.10 gives us 3.78. So 3.78 is the increase. It doesn't matter what the actual temperature is. And I think I said on the previous one like this, you could just plug in a value. Like you could say x is 300 and then add 2.10. So see when x is equal to 302.10, and then see what the value was for 300 when you plug it into this equation, and then see what it is when it's 302.10, and then compare the change. It would be 3.78 bigger. So that would be A. The table above shows some values of x and their corresponding values of f of x for the linear function f. So it's the inputs x, the outputs f of x. What is the x-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x? So the x-intercept is when y is equal to 0. So basically when f of x is 0, what's x in the xy plane? What we can do to find this is just find the equation using the information they gave us, and then plug in 0 for the output, and then solve for x that way. Our change in f of x, or change in y, let me just do it as y, because they even said y equals f of x. Change in y divided by our change in x would be our slope. And our change in y, here we're going down by 3 when x goes up by 1. It's going from negative 11 to negative 10. It's getting less negative by 1. So it's going up by 1 in the x direction, but the y is going down by 3. So that means that our slope is equal to negative 3. If we wrote this out, it'd be y equals negative 3x plus our y-intercept. Again, the y-intercept is not what we're solving for. We're solving for the x-intercept. But we can find the y-intercept to help us find what the x-intercept would be. If you wanted to skip it, you could reverse this. You could do like change in x over change in y. You get it's negative 1/3 y plus our x-intercept, x-int, is equal to x. And then find it that way. That would save you some time, but it's just something people would be less familiar with. So I would do the thing you're familiar with that might take an extra 10 seconds, just so you're more confident in your answer. But anyway, let's choose one of these points. I'm going to do the negative 8 and 12. So when x is negative 8, we get negative 3 times negative 8 plus b is equal to positive 12. Negative 3 times negative 8 is 24. So 24 plus b equals 12, which means we have to subtract 24 from both sides, or you could just think, what do you have to add to 24 to get 12? It would be negative 12. 12 minus 24 also gives you negative 12. So b is negative 12. So if we write out the equation, it would be y equals negative 3x, that's using that negative 3 slope that we found up here, plus negative 12 is the same as minus 12. All right, so this is our equation right here, and we want to find the x-intercept, so that's when y is equal to 0. So I'll plug in 0 for y, and we get 0 equals negative 3x minus 12. Now you just have to figure out what value of x would make this true. You can add 12 to both sides. We get 12 equals negative 3x. And then to get x alone, divide both sides by negative 3. And that gives us the negatives cancel out here, 3's cancel out, x alone on the right side. And positive divided by negative makes a negative, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So we get x is equal to negative 4. So if x is negative 4, it's the x-intercept, which is where it crosses the x-axis. So the y value would always be 0. That's, like we said, that's why we were able to solve it this way. We plugged in 0 for y. So the coordinates would be -4, 0. Kehlani used fabric measuring 5 yards in length to make each suit for a men's choir. The relationship between the number of suits that Kehlani made, x, and the total length of fabric that she purchased, y, in yards, is represented by the equation y minus 5x equals 6. What is the best interpretation of 6 in this context? So just going through the variables again, y is the number of yards, and x is the total length, and x is the number of suits that were made. It might help to rewrite this in slope-intercept form. You get y equals 5x plus 6. 6 is like the initial amount. So no matter what, you need to buy 6 yards? 6 yards of fabric. And then for each additional suit that you're making, you need 5 additional yards. So maybe 6 is just like the extra space just to make sure that you've got some, space between them or something, or just it's like room for error. Or maybe you need 6 yards of fabric regardless of the suits, and then it's 5 per suit. So 6 is like your y-intercept in this case. Kehlani made 6 suits. No, the number of suits is x. This would be represented by x, not 6, so that's wrong. Kehlani purchased a total of 6 yards of fabric, not total. The total fabric would be represented by y. It's going to be 6 plus 5 times the number of suits. Kehlani used a total of 6 yards of fabric to make the suits. What? Purchase, it's saying that you don't use all that you purchased, I guess. It's not that. Kehlani purchased 6 yards more fabric than she used to make the suits. Okay, so 5x is the amount that's used in the suits, and then you're also purchasing 6 more than the 5x you need there. All right, so D does make sense. D would be the correct answer there. A, B, and C are all wrong. The function f of x is defined as 19 more than 4 times the number x. If y equals f of x is graphed in the xy plane, what is the best interpretation of the x-intercept? The x-intercept is when y equals 0. They say f of x is defined as 19 more than 4 times the number x, so that's 4x, and 19 more than that would be 4x plus 19, and that's equal to f of x. It's defined as, so f of x is defined as, that means f of x equals 4x plus 19. What is the best interpretation of the x-intercept? So the x-intercept is when f of x equals 0. So 0 equals 4x plus 19. If they want the actual number, you would subtract 19 from both sides. That gives you 4x equals negative 19. And then you divide both sides by 4 to get the x alone, and x is equal to negative 19 fourths. So when y is 0, or your output is 0, it doesn't say what it's modeling, but our slope was 4, our y-intercept is 19, so that's where you start. To reach an output of 0, you need to input negative 19 fourths. So it'll be something along those lines. So when f of x equals 0, the number is negative 19 fourths. Okay, that sounds good. By the number, they're talking about x, times a number, x. Okay, good. And just to check the other ones, when the number is 0, f of x equals 19, that would be the y-intercept. They're asking about the x-intercept. The value of f of x increases by 1 for each increase of 4 in the value of the number. No, that's wrong, first of all. F of x increases by 4 for each increase of 1 in the value of number. These numbers are backwards, and that would be the slope, not the x-intercept. It's not B, it's not C. For each increase of 1 in the value of number, f of x increases by 4. Okay, so this is at least an accurate representation of the slope. But again, they're not asking for the slope, they're asking for the x-intercept. So D is true, just like B is true of the y-intercept, D is true of the slope, but it's not answering the correct question of what's the x-intercept in this case represent. That would be A. The table above, or it's actually a table to the left, gives the typical amounts of energy per gram expressed in both food calories and kilojoules. We have the same table in the medium section as well. It says of the 3 macronutrients, so protein, fat, carbohydrate. They should write lipid here, but I don't know, they put fat. If the 180 food calories in a granola bar come entirely from P grams of protein, F grams of fat, and C grams of carbohydrate, which of the following expresses F in terms of P and C? Maybe it's not true for all lipids, I don't know, but I've heard this 494 before. Anyway, which of the following expresses F in terms of P and C? So it's saying all of the calories come from one of these categories, protein, fat, or carbs. So that's 180 is the total. And that will be equal to protein times 4. So the grams, this is the number of grams. So each gram of protein is 4 calories. So 4, and are they doing it in calories or are they doing it in kilojoules? Let's see. Food calories. Okay, so we're talking about calories. So we're only really paying attention to the left of these columns here. 4 times P plus 9 times F plus 4 times C. And that would add up to the total calories. Now, we want to get F alone, right? F in terms of P and C. So what we're going to do is subtract 4P and 4C from both sides. So minus 4P minus 4C from both sides. So we have the F terms alone. We're left with 9F is equal to 180 minus 4P minus 4c. And now we've solved for 9f. We want to solve for just f. So we're going to divide everything by 9, which means divide 9f by 9, which will just leave you with f. That's why we're doing that. And then divide every part of this by 9, every term by 9. So 180 divided by 9 is going to be 20. And then the other ones will just stay as negative 4/9. So we have negative 4/9 p minus 4/9 c. So we want something equivalent to that. They put the p and c together. Okay, so we could write it also, right? You could like factor negative 4/9 out of negative 4/9 p minus 4/9 c. So you took a negative out of both of them, they're both positive. And you take 4/9 out of both of them, you just have p and c. Just think if you distribute this, it'd be negative 4/9 p, negative 4/9 times positive c would be minus 4/9 c. So it would give you the same thing as that. All right, so I just wrote it in a different form. This is equal to f. So we want something equivalent to 20 minus 4/9 times the quantity p plus c. And that would be option B. Let's just go through the other ones. This one has plus where it should be negative, so it's not that. This one has a negative and a negative. So when you multiply these, you would actually get plus 4/9 c, negative times negative. Make sure you distribute the negative when you have a negative coefficient. And then this one is a positive 9/4. Oh, and so this one's also flipped, so it's definitely not that one. All right, so that's how you do that one. An object hangs from a spring. The formula L equals 30 plus 2W relates the length L in centimeters of the spring and the weight W in newtons of the object. Which of the following describes the meaning of 2 in this context? All right, well, it looks like the length starts at 30. So even if the weight was 0, the length would be 30. And then for every, what was it, pound or newton? Every newton of weight, add 2 more to the length in centimeters. So 2 more centimeters. All right, so they say, what's the 2 in this context? The 2 is this slope in front of the W. So it's the amount that's added for each additional newton, the amount that's added in centimeters for each additional newton. The length in centimeters of the spring with no weight attached. No, that would be 30. That would not be the 2. So it's not that one. The weight in newtons of an object that will stretch the spring 30 centimeters. No, it's not a weight. The weight would be a value of W. 2 is not a value of W, it's what you're multiplying W by. The increase in the weight, no, it's increase in the length, right? Because the slope is like change in the output divided by input. The output is L here. So we want it to essentially be the change in length divided by 1 unit of change in weight. So this one's got it inverted there. And the increase in the length in centimeters of the spring for each 1 newton increase in the weight of the object, right? Every time you add 1 newton to the weight, the length will get 2 centimeters longer. So D is correct. For the function f, if f of 3x equals x minus 6 for all values of x, what is the value of f of 6? We have here, if f of 3x equals x minus 6, and if we want to put this in terms of 3x, right? So if like 3x is here, we could rewrite this as f of 3x equals 3x divided by 3, because 3x divided by 3 is x minus 6. See, the reason I'm doing that is just so that you have this 3x is preserved, and then you could change it for something else. You could say like 3x equals p, right, or something like that. Then you get f of p is equal to, put the p where the 3x is, p divided by 3 minus 6. Where I get this, just, I didn't want to have 3x as the input and a third of that as the output. I acknowledge the fact that you're multiplying it by a third. Whatever you input, you multiply it by a third, and then you subtract 6. So now we can do it with any number. You don't have to have something that starts with a 3 as the coefficient. So you could say f of 6, and now you're putting that in place of the p, is equal to 6 over 3 minus 6. 6 over 3 is 2, so we get 2 minus 6, which is equal to negative 4. So the function of 6 will give you an output of negative 4. Now the other way you could do it is just turn 6 so it looks like this, so it's in the same format of 3x. You could say, well, if 6 equals 3x, then that would mean that x is equal to a third of 6, so x equals 2. So you just plug 2 in for the x. F of 3 times 2 equals 2 minus 6. 2 minus 6 equals negative 4. So either way you get negative 4. I would do it the first way, just easier to keep track of, but they'll both get you the same answer. The linear function g is defined by g of x equals b minus 15x, where b is a constant. If g of c plus 7 equals c over 4, where c is a constant, which of the following expressions represents the value of b? Well, are we trying to find it? We're trying to find it in terms of c, it looks like. So a previous one like this, where you're inputting something that's not like exactly represented over on the right side, then I inputted x as c plus 7 and then figured out it would have to be like x minus 7 over 4. So we could do something like that. But since we're trying to get it ultimately in c, what I'm going to do is, instead of putting the x into this other function, or this other form of the g function, I'm going to put c plus 7 into the original one. So we'll say g of c plus 7, and look, I'm not using this, I'm using this function here, would be equal to b minus 15 times c plus 7. All right, so we've got that. And we already know that b minus 15 times the quantity c plus 7 is equal to c over 4. So I can write this as c over 4 is equal to b minus 15 times c plus 7. I'm basically setting this equal to the same thing over here if you input c plus 7 in for x. Now I'm going to distribute this negative 15 to the c and to the plus 7, which gives me b minus 15c minus, that'd be 70 plus 35, so minus 105 equals c over 4. If I want to get the b alone, what I'll do is add 15c to both sides, and then I'll add 105 to both sides. That gives me that b is equal to, well, c over 4 plus 15c plus 105. So we know it's going to be one of these ones with plus 105, so we can eliminate a and b right away. But now we just have to find a way to combine these. Let's get a common denominator, so I'll multiply it by 4 over 4, and 15 times 4 is 60, so that's 60c over 4 plus c over 4 plus 105 equals b. And then you have c fourths plus 60c fourths. They have the same denominator. You can add the numerators. So one of them plus another 60 of them gives you 61 c's over 4 plus 105, and that would be equal to b. So that would be option C. All right, so that's all you got to do there. I'm trying to think if there's a good way to check this. Not so much. I mean, you could try to do it a different way. You could try to solve it in terms of the x and then convert it back into c, but it just adds a lot of extra steps. So that's all you've got to do. For groups of 25 or more people, a museum charges $21 per person for the first 25 people and $14 for each additional person. Which function f gives the total charge in dollars for a tour group with n people where n is greater than or equal to 25? Since we know n is greater than 25, we can just figure out what that 25 times 21 is. Because if it's greater than 25 people, you know you paid 25 times 21, right? Those first 25 people paid $21. Then after that, you'd be paying $14 for all of the people that are more than 25. So if it's 26 people, there's only one person paying 14. If it's 29 people, that's 4 more than 25, so it'd be 4 people paying 14. Ultimately, what we could do is take this number n, which we know is greater than or equal to 25, and subtract 25 from it. Right, because if you have exactly 25 people, then 0 people are paying 14, so 25 minus 25. All right, so this will be the cost, 25 times 21, right, because we know there are at least 25 people to pay the $21, and then n minus 25 represents how many people more than 25 you have, and all of those are paying 14, so multiply that by 14. They don't have something exactly like this, so we do have to distribute it. 25 times 21, we know 25 times 20 is 500, and we need one more 25, so it'd be 525, plus, if we distribute this 14, it gives us 14n, minus 14 times 25, which, let's see, 10 times 25 is 250, then 4 more would be another 100, so that's minus 350. And now we can just combine these like terms, the 525 and the 350. We get that 14n plus, it's going to be 175, is equal to the total amount you're paying, so f of n. And 14n plus 175 is option A. Right. So that 175 is basically accounting for how much more those 25 people are paying than the 14 per person. The cost of renting a carpet cleaner is $52 for the first day and $26 for each additional day. Which of the following functions gives the cost C of D in dollars for renting the carpet cleaner for D days where D is a positive integer, so it's at least 1. We know the first day you paid $52. So we know the first day you had to pay $52 because it's a positive integer, it has to be at least 1. At least one day you paid $52. Then from there on, you paid $26. So we can't just multiply that by the number of days because that would mean you're paying 26 for the first day. The first day you paid the 52, but you don't pay an additional 26. So we're going to multiply 26 by D minus 1. So it's how many days in addition to that first day that is paid for by the 52. Which means if you get it for exactly one day, then this would become 1 minus 1 is 0. So this part would just be canceled out. You're just left with the 52. If it's 2 days, then 2 minus 1 gives you 1 day in addition to the $52 day that you pay the 26. So it looked like this. Again, they didn't distribute it, so we have to distribute. It gives us 26D minus 26, and then we still have that being added to the 52. So 52 minus 26, those are like terms in this case, and that would just be 26. So 26 plus 26D is equal to C of D. And you could change the order of these. It looks like they're putting the D term first. So the commutative property of addition, it doesn't matter what order you add things. This will become 26D plus 26 equals C of D. And again, this is, I think there's one similar to this before. The fact that the constant and the slope ended up being the same just has to do with the fact that 52 is double 26. So the first day, you're paying double. If they'd chosen 50 as the first day cost, then this would be 24, because it's 24 more than the cost for a normal day. Right, so 26D plus 26. Right, the first day, you're paying 26 more than normal. Every other day, you just pay the 26. And that's the end. All right. So this, there weren't that many different types of problems they had on here. They had a couple like this, where they gave you a word problem and you have to write an equation from it. But with the word problem, they made it so either the first day or the first 5 days or something like that, you were paying a different rate. So you can't just plug in, oh, this is the slope, this is the y-intercept. You have to write like a kind of a fake y-intercept, and then you do, like the slope is still real, but the slope times, instead of times x, it's times x minus something. So you're not counting those first few days or those first few instances, and then you have to use the distributive property. So just make sure you've done problems like that so that you're comfortable making it. You could also do it without doing the distributive property. Like some people will just go straight to this and be like, all right, well, every day you pay 26, plus the first day you paid an additional 26, so I'm adding 26. If you can think that way, like it could be better, but this way I think is maybe safer to avoid errors, is just doing the 26 times d minus however many. But just don't rush on these because they are a little bit more complicated than the ones you'll see in the medium and the easy section. This one was similar. If you see any of these where it's like n is greater than or equal to 25, usually they're just giving you that to make sure that there's not going to be an error and that your equation can actually work in all of the instances that are within the domain. And this one was interesting. I would say definitely make sure that you're comfortable doing this one from A58. They had a similar one where you're not inputting just C, you're inputting like something times C or C plus something, right? So whatever the input is not represented exactly in the output function. Yeah, this one, f of 3 of x, or f of 3x. So just make sure you're comfortable with how to operate with those. They're not too complicated. They had a lot of word problems in interpreting what the different parts of the function would be in the context of that word problem. And make sure, watch out for x-intercept, because we're used to seeing y-intercept and slope, and maybe you might even be used to seeing like when w is 3, what's the output or something like that. But they did ask x-intercept a fair amount of times. They had 2 different examples of the Fahrenheit question. So it's like converting Kelvin into Fahrenheit. So maybe make sure you're comfortable with those types of problems. I mean, it's the same as a different function, just it's one that you might actually use in a chemistry or physics class when you're doing like unit conversions. But I would make sure you're comfortable enough with those and how those work. And then they use this table in the medium section and in the hard section. So this is something you would actually probably learn in biology, depending on what level of bio you're doing, which is the number of calories in food, the kilojoules. This one, you didn't even use the kilojoules. They just gave it kind of as a red herring, or so you could identify which information you need. But, it might be another table that you should do some practice problems with so that you're more comfortable with it. But it's going to work the same as the other ones. Another word problem. Here's finding the x-intercept from a table. So you're probably used to finding the y-intercept from a table, but you'll also might have to do the x-intercept. And this was the Fahrenheit one. They had 2 like this. Be very careful for this if they're doing one where it's, how much paint do you need to cover the walls, or how much stain do you need to cover the fence, whatever it is. Check, they might want you to do it twice. So like 2 coats of paint or 2 coats of stain. Just if that's the case, make sure you double your answer at the end. I think the fact that they put 2 examples like this and both of them said to do 2 coats, or they said to do it twice, does indicate that's probably something that they're willing to put up in the test. So just really watch out for that. Don't be in a rush too much. Always look at that last sentence. Even if you have to reread it again after you've bubbled in your answer or circled your answer, it's like, I feel like I might be missing something here. Let me just reread that last sentence. Oh, it's twice, okay? So always look for those puzzles we're trying to get in those tricks. There's another word problem in context. This one, I think I said a similar thing in the medium section, but when they're dealing with years, sometimes they're not going to make t actually be the year, right? We're not inputting 2013 or 2000 as this. It's how many years after some specific year. So in this case, they said how many years after 2000. If you're using the point from 2000, then t is 0. If you're from 2013, then it would be 13. If it was from 2020, then t would be 20. So sometimes they'll give that to you, right? Like in this case, they said t is the number of years after 2000. Sometimes you're just setting it up on your own, and you probably would want to set it up so that it's not starting from the year 0, because none of the data points are going to be that far back. But it's just a recommendation in that case. But always look for what they're wanting. Here you had to find the slope and the y-intercept, and then you had to subtract them. Just make sure you subtract by a negative correctly, because it was minus negative 128. They did put this answer in case you just subtracted 128. So be careful with that. That would be wrong in this case. And here's the similar one with the stain. Make sure you double it. It's another word problem. This is another one that's dealing with the dates. This one also used that x minus 3 in context. So like I was saying, they had a lot of word problems where there's some amount that you're paying in the first number of days and you have to subtract the first 3 days, something like that. This was just one where they actually gave you the equation. You have to interpret how that works. So what would the x-intercept mean in this case? Or what would they say? The number 2.74, that's not the y-intercept in this case, because when you distribute this out, you'll actually get a different y-intercept. But what does this number 2.74 actually represent in this scenario? Oh, this one, I guess you're combining two different functions. So just make sure you're comfortable with that. If they say f of x plus g of x, just evaluate what f of x is, evaluate what g of x is, and then add the two together. And then that would be your h of x. Just combine your like terms. It's not too complicated, but if you haven't done it before, it could be a little bit, unnerving. This one was one where they shifted a function down by 13. So it just means whatever the shift is, in this case it was minus 13, you just do that to the output. So 0 became negative 13, 1 became negative 12, 2 became negative 11. We've done examples like that graphically. This one was similar. You're shifting down this function by 19. Or actually they said they had your function and they shifted it up by 19. So you have to think about, okay, well, then what was my original function? Well, since it's just an upward shift, the slope didn't change. Slope only changes if you do rotation or if you dilate it, which usually is not going to be something you'll do with linear functions on the SAT. So if you're just shifting it either up or to the side, the slope stays the same. So just think about how does that affect the y-intercept. In this case, the y-intercept is down here. Here's the other Fahrenheit one. This one is interesting because it's something you'll use P and Q in economics, especially in like micro, but it's just a normal linear function. Just the numbers were bigger, and you had to maybe for some people they might be confused why as the price goes up, the quantity goes down. But if you really think about it, it's like, if something's more expensive, fewer people will buy it. That's why the demand goes down. Hourly charge. Okay, so this is another one where, it's like you have the hourly charge, but it starts after the second hour, and like this first thing, it has the y-intercept is not the y-intercept because it's got the first 2 hours baked into it, so you have to subtract them from it. All right, but that's pretty much all you'd see from linear functions on the hardest difficulty. I already have the easy and medium ones up, and we'll have I think there are 2 more sections of algebra, inequalities and systems, so those will be coming soon. And if you have any feedback, any questions or concerns, if you found an error or had a better way of doing one of the problems, please comment them below, and thank you for watching.